Dancing. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Publishing Without Supervision. In this podcast, we basically follow exercise journey towards relearning how to write and publish and make lots of money. Hopefully, yay! So,
in that order.
Yeah. It would be good if we could make lots of money before we wrote and published, but I don't think that model would work somehow. But anyway, on today's episode, we have a special guest. We have Scott King, who is joining us. And his little interesting story here. So basically, this lovely, wonderful individual here decided to basically do what X and I are planning to do with this one book, which is a political thriller of his called Ameriguns. Except what he's gone and done is done the whole thing in 5 days. So he's gone from idea creation all the way through to writing and self-editing and then sending off to his editor all within just 5 days. Welcome aboard, Scott. Can you tell us why you decided to do this?
I'm pretty clear in the book, and I'm very honest about it. I did it honestly just to see if I could do it. There was no other reason. It was just mainly like, hey, can I write a book in 5 days? I don't know. Let's find out. And I found out.
And you found out, and it was possible.
Yeah, I mean, it was absolutely brutal, but I did it. And I think other people could do it, or at least take the methods I used to do it in 5 days and maybe do their own book in 10 days or 15 days or whatever suits them and their schedule.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you were, like you said, the reason you were able to do it is because you had these methods that you're already familiar with. So basically, you already understand the craft of writing. So can we talk a little bit about craft here?
Oh, yeah. I'm good with craft. I like craft.
Okay, so basically, let's dive right in with your author voice. So you decided with Ameriguns you were going to write a thriller because it suited your author voice. What is an author voice?
The best way to think of an author's voice is to think first about character voices, right? Most writers know that when you're talking about characters should sound different. You know, one character's piece of dialogue can't just easily be taken and given to another character because those characters have different backgrounds. They have different points of view and different perspectives. So the same thing applies to an author's voice. If you were to sit down and write my book, Ameriguns, with the exact same plot, exact same storyline, your natural writing voice would make the book be different. And that's just how writing works. So I knew going into Ameriguns that my background comes from screenwriting, that I already don't do really deep POVs, that my prose isn't as flowery or super fleshed out as it can be like in certain epic fantasies or just other people's writing styles. And so I knew, hey, if I'm going to do this, thrillers automatically just fit my style and I should just go for it. And that's how I picked thrillers and suspense.
Okay. So how do you think that a newbie writer or someone who's never thought of author voice before, how would they go about finding their author voice?
Oh, man, that's so hard. I used to teach college, and it was always a struggle first to teach the students because they were juniors in college. So they've been through all the starter classes. But they were just getting to some of the deeper stuff. And I always struggled even just to explain to them what an author's voice was and realize that, when I write a book, the way I shape my story, the way, I decide whether it's a happy ending or sad ending, the absolute structure, whether it's humorous, the overall tone, all those little bits go into an author's voice. And you can't just wake up one night and have your voice. It's something you kind of just discover and flesh out and develop as you write. So if you're trying to find your voice, the easiest and fastest way to do it is just to write and keep on writing.
Awesome. So do you think it is something that's important to know, or can people just happily stumble along without realizing their author voice?
I'm sure probably lots of people stumble along not really, thinking about it. I came from academia, so these are the kind of things you talk about in school. It's kind of things I try to teach with students. So it's something that's always on my mind. But if you didn't know what an author voice was, you probably could still write a book without a problem. Yet at the same time, if you know what an author voice is, you know that as an author, you lean towards certain things, that you have certain strengths or weaknesses. You can play to those and help fix them.
Okay.
Say that if you're writing under multiple pen names, if you're used to writing with one voice, how do you recommend switching voices? I guess because you'll see examples like with J.K. Rowling writing under like Robert Galbraith or whatever it was, and you have to really define the voice again. And obviously by using another pen name, it's a discernible thing to the audiences of the already established series. It's a different name, new expectations, but I guess just from that craft perspective, you're already used, like you found your voice. How do you find a new one?
I don't know if you can find a new one. When you're talking about someone who's writing in a different pen name, you're generally talking about someone who's writing in a different genre, and usually that's for some sort of marketing or publicity reason. They don't want to be recognized, or they don't want these readers to cross over with those readers. But when it gets down to the nitty gritty of whatever that story is, it's still the same person creating that story. They lean towards opening scenes this way or ending these kind of scenes with cliffhangers. The natural things they do as a writer, even if they try to shift the tone of the story, the overall voice is going to be really, really close. I've not read a lot of pen names, so it's kind of hard for me to judge whether, like let's look at Stephen King, who I know wrote pen names like years and years ago. It's hard to judge whether his Stephen King novels are really that different voice-wise from, was it Peter Straub? Or I can't remember his other name, but what I mean,
Richard Bachman.
Yeah, there you go, Richard Bachman. That's what it is. Yeah. So it would be very hard to say that they're drastically different. The tone is different because they're different books, and sometimes they're slightly different genres. But his voice, even there, is still pretty close.
I've found the same with your example, the X with J.K. Rowling and Robert Galbraith, that they did come across quite the same voice. It was only different because they were the different kinds of characters in different situations, and it was a completely different genre. I mean, but I would not have put it together myself that these were the same author, and unless it had been pointed out to me, and then once it had been, it was like, oh, I see it now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and that's what I was kind of wondering as to whether you kind of think that author voice is kind of definitive to the author, not so much what they're writing, I guess, or eventually it gets to that point where they could be writing anything and it still will be them. Like kind of in the example of like Neil Gaiman or something like that. It's always going to be something kind of quirky and the dipping its toe into the fantastical, but still kind of gloomy, and there's probably going to be rain and tea.
Right, exactly. A Neil Gaiman novel or short story or poem feels like a Neil Gaiman novel, short story, or poem. It's just who he is as an author. He knew his voice way, way, way long ago, and he has just embraced it.
So it really does sound like author voice, and realizing what makes up your author voice is very important if you want to actually sell books and make readers happy and make readers want to come back to who like what you're writing, come back again and again.
Well, definitely once you start talking about selling books, and then you get into marketing and publicity and brand, author voice kind of goes into what is your brand as an author. Now, a lot of times, especially if you're thinking pen names, your brand is going to be the series, right? So if I am a romance author, my brand is going to be these romance novels. But if I have a pen name that's military sci-fi, the brand's going to be slightly different. When you're talking about someone like Neil Gaiman, because he's just so easy to talk about, his brand is himself. He is his own brand. Doesn't matter what series or what he's writing in. So it kind of just depends on what you're going for as an author, or where you're at in your career even.
It's interesting that we've gone off topic so much into pen names, because part of my journey will be creating a new pen name, and I've never written under my own name because it's so terribly common. It's it's so hard to find me in amongst all the other people with my real name. And I'll be going out and creating a new pen name again because I'm going for a completely different genre and style, and even length of book will be totally different for me. But that's something you've done as well, because you've written, from what I've seen, you've published mostly middle grade fantasies and a couple of non-fiction books. And with your political thriller Ameriguns, you've totally gone and done something different under your own name instead of under a pen name. But what kind of difficulties do you think you'll have with this completely different genre under your name, do you think?
I don't think the genre itself is difficult. I read a lot of thrillers, so from a writing standpoint, I feel very comfortable with suspense in those kind of books. The problem here is just jumping genres anyway. You know, I do have the middle grade fantasies. I have an epic grade fantasy on the way. I have a graphic novel series that's much more kind of like I guess probably teen, if you're going to categorize it as a novel. I have the nonfiction books, and so I'm a big mess. So my mailing list now, I think I have 6 or 7 mailing lists. And that's a choice I purposely made. I didn't want to do a pen name just because I like my name. That's probably a really weird ego thing to say, but I like Scott King. Scott King sounds nice. I grew up, my family owned a restaurant. It was the King's Pub. Like it just kind of is who I am. So going into publishing, I decided that my brand was going to be myself. So no matter what genre I was writing in, I was just going to be me, and that was it. And at the same time, I don't write anything too raunchy or too racy. So I'm not worried about, certain kids finding, my book and being like, oh no, that's a no-no book or something along those lines. Yeah, there's cussing and there's action and there's darkness in the thriller. But if you look at the thriller book, it's clearly not a kid's book. I'm not going to have a crossover from a middle grade fantasy into that. The problem is trying to sell to a genre that I've never sold in before. Launching Ameriguns was brutal. It was really, really rough. And even now, it didn't do well and it didn't do bad. It's just kind of like in the middle there, which, considering I didn't have a mailing list when I launched the book, I'm pretty happy with it. We'll see how books 2 and 3 do when they come out. But
when do you intend to release 2 and 3?
2 is done, and I'm probably going to start writing 3 next week. And it just kind of depends. I'm going to look at the rest of the year of when I want books to come out and then map them out from there.
Awesome. Do you think that it's you said it's kind of doing the in-between at the moment, but do you think it might have done a bit better if you'd already had book 2 ready and waiting to go out? Or
that the current thing now is that you should definitely release lots of titles as fast as possible. So for example, with my fantasy series I plan to launch, book 1's done, and book 1 has been done basically since last June. I'm going to start writing book 2 this March, and I'm just going to keep sitting on them until I feel I have enough ready to go. And for my fantasy series, I'm definitely going to embrace it and go that route. For the thrillers, they're just something I'm doing for fun because I like it and I can crank them out fast, and just why not? So I really wasn't worried about the marketing or that kind of stuff. It would do what it would do. If it finds the audience after the fact, it would find it after the fact. I didn't need it to be a huge hit. As long as it just, in the long run didn't lose money, as long as it eventually broke even, I was happy. And I think we should do that by February.
Oh, awesome. Congratulations on that one then. Yeah, well, X and I plan to do the same things with our new genres. We will be spending the first quarter of the year, possibly longer, considering how long it's taking me to get, my plot sorted. And we'll be banking our books until a certain time we can release, and then release them one after another in a staggered type fashion. Do you have any advice for us on doing something like that?
In terms of staggering the releases? No, I've not done it yet. I'm sitting on mine so that I can do it for the first time. So yeah, you would know as better as I do at this point.
Fair enough. Wow, I went totally off topic with all of those questions. Should I rein us back into craft again.
It's your show. We can talk about whatever you want. We can sit here and break down your book if you want to do that. I'm happy with it.
We could, but I don't want to.
Okay.
Not yet. It's not ready for public eyes to poke at it yet. So can we go back to the author voice? Not really the author voice, but choosing a point of view. So what are the different points of views and the pros or cons of using them?
The points of view. So the basic that everyone pretty much uses now is the third person. And that's when you say, like, you know, he walked into the room, she walked into the room. And then there's first person, and it's like, I walked in the room. And then there's second person, which is like, you walked into the room. You pretty much never use second person unless you're doing choose your own adventures. And I kind of wanted to write a book in second person, so I wrote a choose your own adventure just so I could write a book in second person and say I did it. But otherwise, no one ever does it. As long as you stick to either first person or third person, you'll be fine.
Yeah, it's the same with first person present. I've always really enjoyed first person present, but it's one of those things where it's almost like a surreal thing. You know, I pick up the cup. It's not, you're right there in the moment. So everything is kind of happening as it's happening rather than even a first person narrator telling you in kind of telling you a story. It's as the things are happening to the narrator as he's experiencing it. So it can kind of have this almost out of body experience type of a thing.
I mean, that works as long as you feel comfortable doing it, and as long as it fits your genre. Like, if you're writing epic fantasy, that might not work because epic fantasy should feel old and ancient, and even if it's an action thriller in that world, it still would kind of feel off. So as long as you're picking the right kind of story, that should be fine.
Yeah, exactly. I could see it being used in, say, like a thriller, like if it was like one of those types of scenarios where a bunch of people wake up on a train and no one remembers how they got there or who they are. It just begins with, I wake up and there's a bunch of people around me. I have no idea who they are, and I have a strange piece of paper in my pocket that has all these cryptic words on it. I don't know what it means. You know, that's the type of story that where if you were wanting to get in someone's head, then maybe try out, those different types of perspective. But like you were saying, when otherwise do you see these things other than third person or first person past really being utilized these days?
So, sorry, I misunderstood the question there.
No, I was just commenting that, like you were saying that you really don't see anything other than third person or first person past used nowadays, and if you are, you damn well have to have a creative reason to use it.
Well, even like as of 20 years ago, third person omniscient is when you have a story told. There's generally a narrator telling the story, and they hop from head to head of the characters. So if you're talking the geek world, the Dragonlance novels were all written with third-person omniscient, and it jumps from characters' head and head to head. Dune is another famous sci-fi that's done that way. It is very, very, very hard to write third-person omniscient because if you do it wrong, people just think you're head hopping, and that's, if you're meant to be writing third-person not omniscient, then that's a problem. You shouldn't be doing that. It just kind of fallen out of vogue. There's a good chance it might come back around because these things do work in cycles. But right now, it's pretty much just basic third person and third person objective and first person.
How different do you think your story, Ameriguns, would have been if you'd opted to go for a different point of view than the one you did?
Let's see. I probably wouldn't have done first person because I'm not a big fan of writing first person just for my own voice. With the screenwriting background, everything in screenplays is written third person present. So the only thing I really would have switched up is written Americans as a present tense story instead of past tense. And I mean, those are minor changes, and some people are fine with it, some people aren't fine with it. So then you get into readers' taste of whether they're put off by present tense or past tense.
Really, their expectation of the genre as well, I guess, is what it comes down to. So, speaking of expectations, this is going to be a huge jump to characters, but I thought it was an excellent point in there. So, your character in Americans, Nathaniel Ryder, isn't the typical thriller stereotype because he's black, he's gay, and in the opening scenes, he's mistaken for the shooter. So what made you decide to go so against type here?
I definitely do not write to market. So for me, I always put the character and the story first. It's very, very important. Whatever I'm trying to get across is what I go for. In this case, I definitely want to tackle gun violence. The book definitely is just seeping with things that relate to gun violence. So in the opening scene, you have a black FBI agent trying to stop a shooter. It's it's not that far out from what we have in the news nowadays, and it's what I needed to do to tell the story. If I had a white, more buff action guy telling that, then it just wouldn't have fit what I needed to fit. And I had him be not straight just because I thought it was interesting. There wasn't actually a story reason for that other than just I thought it was interesting.
Fair enough. And another character that you talked about in the 5-day novel book that you wrote as a companion piece to explain how Americans came to fruition is Madeline Campbell. She's a senator from Texas, but she grew into much more than you would anticipated. So how did you deal with a character that develops a mind of their own and goes off in a completely different direction?
In this case, it's not that she went in a different direction. It's more that she just kind of took over. And I am definitely the kind of person who, even when I'm teaching that, I tell the students to embrace your character's voice. Just like I tell the writers to embrace your author voice. If you have characters they're doing things that you didn't plan on, but it's still good and interesting, follow it through. If it sucks and doesn't work out, guess what? That's what rewrites are for. But at least for the first draft, definitely embrace it and see where it takes you, because sometimes if you may have planned to go right and the story and the character go left, it could turn out way better. So in the case of Madeline Campbell, she was supposed to be just a small, not even a supporting character, just a little small cameo character, kind of like a red herring. And she just kept showing up for scenes and scenes and scenes. And when it came time to rewrite, I was like, well, either I need to cut all this stuff out because it just doesn't serve the overall plot, or I need to flesh her out just a little bit more and make her story tie in just a little bit more thematically, so that it just makes sense. It doesn't feel like out of the blue. And that's what I did. I was like, hey, she's awesome. I'm going to keep her. And she's there.
Well, she sounded pretty awesome too. So should we take it right back a step, right back to the beginning of characters and just discuss how do you create a protagonist?
How do for me, myself, it's kind of weird. Generally speaking, I figure out what it is that I want to tell in the overall story. So in this case, I want to deal with gun violence. So I knew right away I wanted a character who was going to be somehow related to guns. All right, well, obviously he should be an FBI agent. So I was like, my protagonist has to be an FBI agent. Well, what I wanted to be like, and that's when we started figuring out what serves the theme, what serves the story. And once those kind of things were done, and I knew what kind of general character I needed, I actually went into the character building. But for me, what that means is I just need to hear their voice. I need to know what their point of view is and kind of what their attitude is. I can't explain how I do it other than I just look at them. I normally make a list of like, what are their personality traits? What kind of things they like? What do they do? I just keep going until I have enough to know who they are as a person. So I know, for example, Nathaniel in the book, he likes weird craft beers. I don't like weird craft beers, but Nathaniel, he really enjoys weird craft beers. For example, he's rebuilding his apartment. He bought a townhouse and he's remodeling the whole thing, and it's a little side story throughout it. It's strange, but those little tidbits help me figure out who he was as a character and help me determine how he sees the world. And because that's what character voice is. So once I had his voice down, I was fine going forward.
How much yeah, I guess like how much information do you need in order to really feel that you have that character voice established? Like you can get lost in world building and character building, and gets to that point where you've just, you know, you think by having 200 questions answered about your character that you actually know them, or that's the quota that you need to hit, or something like that. Where do you feel like you know your characters?
I mean, that's going to be different for every author. There is no single answer. For me personally, I'm pretty strong with dialogue. Dialogue is one of the things I'm good at. Prose I struggle with, and I'm probably always going to struggle with prose. But I get dialogue and I hear voices. So when it comes to voices and figuring out who a character is, maybe a sheet of paper, just scratching notes here and there, and that's generally all I need. I don't plan out that much backstory of what was their favorite color growing up or things like that. I don't know those kind of things. It's just whatever I need, and it normally for me isn't a lot. And I always focus a lot more on the main character, and everyone else I kind of figure out as we go along. Maybe a paragraph and that's it.
Do you find that that's kind of from the screenwriting background? Like I personally have that same background as well, so I never have a problem with character voices in my head because they're aching to be leap onto the page as is. Do you find that having that kind of working in dialogue predominantly as opposed to prose, that you're able to kind of establish character voice faster?
Oh, I'm sure it is, because if you look at a screenplay, what is a screenplay? It's pretty much all dialogue. Yeah, there's character tags and then you have action lines, but the majority of a screenplay is dialogue. And I mean, that's what I went to school for. It's what I spent time doing, spent time teaching. I just definitely feel natural towards dialogue. So it makes sense that if you're coming from a screenplay background too, that you would also connect pretty quickly with characters. And like I said earlier, there's no right or wrong answer for what it takes you as an author to hear that character's voice. If it takes me one sheet of paper, it takes you 5 minutes staring at a screen. It might take someone else 2 hours with a legal pad. There's no right or wrong. It's whatever you need to do as an author just to get it done.
Yeah, that's a good point. And just I guess on the topic of screenwriting in films, do you find I guess, because when it comes to you can read books and you can learn a lot, as much as you can, about prose, and you can read books about how to write books, but I find people when people struggle with dialogue, a lot of times you can find those things as just watching a film, and you can see no one talks like this in a film, or like, and in those examples of a film where the dialogue is so disjointed, those are the good examples of what you shouldn't be doing in your book as well. Do you ever find that?
My dialogue is such a hard thing to teach. My favorite assignment that I would give students is I would tell them, all right, here's what I want you to do. Go to a public place. We're a college campus, so it's really easy to find a public place. You can go to the dining hall. You can go to the quad, the park area, and all that kind of stuff. But coffee shop, wherever you want to go. Go to a public space, sit down, take out your phone, hit the record button for the audio, and record 2 people talking, 3 people talking, whatever. Just record a conversation. And then once you have about 5 minutes, go home and do a transcript of that whole conversation. That conversation is going to be clunky as heck. There's going to be like ums, uhs. People are going to be interrupting each other. It's just going to be bad. You would never want to put that into a story. So then what I have them do is trim that down, the 5-minute transcript, into whatever the essence of that conversation was. And maybe it would be boiled down to half a page, or maybe it's boiled down to just like 3 lines of dialogue. I end up working with them to kind of figure out what that is. But yeah, dialogue's hard to teach. And the best way I think to learn it is to listen to real dialogue and then modify it to what it would be if it were in a movie or a book.
I guess from there, taking those characters and or at least taking that inspiration from real life and diluting it down to actual usable dialogue. What's next from there? Like how can you? What do you do with those characters once you know that you have those characters? How are you, or at least what it is that you're trying? Are you wow, I'm rambling. I'm gonna cut all this in the in post. I'm gonna just rephrase it right now. Once you have established your characters, what are you going to be? How? Oh no, it's losing. Good thing this isn't live. No, this question's just diarrhea in my mouth.
That's a lovely visual.
Yeah, I know. It's just dripping everywhere. That's fine. It's strawberry jam in my mouth. Is that better?
Get to the question.
Yeah. Once you've established your characters and you know where it is that you want to take them, how do you challenge them once you've established who that they are and where you're trying to take them? What's the best way that you'd go about challenge them to get them to the place where you want them to go, I guess?
The very first thing I teach in my books and even in class is I have students pitch their story to me. And when they pitch their story, they have to have a protagonist. They have to have what the protagonist wants. They have to have what's getting in the way of that want, and they have to have the genre. So what you're talking about now is deciding, once you understand who the character is and you know where you want to take them, what's missing right there is what is it they want? Because there has to be something they want. So figure out what it is that they want. Figure out, because you're the author and you're a jerk, figure out what you can do to make sure they don't get what they want, whether it's another character, whether it's life, whether it's the weather, whether it's something. It doesn't even have to be big and dramatic. It could just be they just want a cup of coffee and they get to the coffee shop 5 minutes late because traffic was ridiculous, you know? It's just figure out what they want and just keep taking it away from them.
Perfect. And do you find that characters have to be likable? And if so, how do you make them likable? Or if they don't have to be likable, how do you make them really unlikable?
I don't think a character has to be likable, but I think that a character has to be, or at least the reader has to still be invested into that character, even if they aren't likable. So whether they're a nice guy or a jerk, the reader needs to care what's going to happen to them. As to how you do that's a really hard thing to do, and that's also goes back to your own reader or your own author voice and kind of stories you like to tell. If you're trying to make someone automatically sympathetic with a character, you want to hurt the character, because if you open up a story, or even early in the story, you see a character hurt, you're going to empathize with them. You're going to feel bad for them. That's a tough one. In terms of being unlikable, you could still have someone who's unlikable. If you look at the old TV show House was known for being a jackass. He just was, and that was the brand of the show. But even though he was a jackass, people loved him because he was funny, and as much of a jackass as he still was trying to solve whatever thing it was. You know, right now we're on TV is the current season of Sherlock, the miniseries. So, you know, episode 1 and 2 aired. We don't know what's going to happen yet in 3 at this point. But look at that character of Sherlock, how Benedict Cumberbatch plays him. He's kind of a dick. I mean, Sherlock is a jerk, but people love him. And why do they love him? You know, he's just fascinating. He's interesting. He's well acted, but at the same time, he's still a good guy in that case too. You know, so it's just figuring out what kind of story you want to tell and just making sure the character or the people reading or watching care about that character, no matter whether they're nice or not nice.
And do you think that those kind of the conflicting natures should be both internal and external?
In terms of whether they're nice or not nice?
Or like why it is that it pushes these persons to be the way that they are? Should there be reasons internally why they're reacting as such, or is it because of the world that they're this way, or that in the case of House, he's just a jerk?
Well, no, that's not true, because on House he was a jerk. You know, he had the physical pain constantly, and then he had the narcotic addiction because of the pain. So there was more to it. As to whether it's internal or external, generally you want to go with both, but it depends on your story and your voice. If for some reason, we don't really get to super know the character till later on, you probably won't have an internal reason, at least a reason that the reader knows, but you as the author probably want to know what that reason is, just because it'll help you tell the story better.
Yeah, okay, and that's kind of one of the things that I was getting at with how much do you want to already know about your character before you already start writing it. Even if you don't have those things established, do you think you should have like a certain kind of an idea of a certain past defining event that maybe like you don't exactly know what it was, but there's a reason why he's sour or something like that?
If it works for you, then go for it. If it doesn't work for you, then don't. I mean, again, this is very specific to who you are as a creator. Writing is a weird thing to do, and when you're talking about this character stuff, it's whatever you need to tell your story. And if you need that defining moment, if it makes you feel better and confident as you're writing these scenes, it makes you hear their voice better, then of course have it. Whether the reader finds out later or doesn't find out later, it doesn't matter. Just do whatever you need to do.
Perfect.
That's awesome. I think that's probably a good place to end this up at. I feel like we've been kind of interrogating you there, Scott. I hope it hasn't felt that way.
Tell us how to do things.
It's okay. I can handle it.
Well, we won't need to bring the waterboarding in yet, but yeah, we'll end it before that happens. Anyway, thank you very much, Scott, for coming in and answering all of our difficult questions.
No, they weren't bad. They just made me think. It was okay. Normally you go on the podcast and they're like, well, who are you? What did you do? How did you get there? What are you selling? So this was nice. I had to actually like actively listen and think. So it was just fun.
Yeah, well, we're basically trying to, like I said, interrogate our guests to find out, all the juicy secrets that you know about what you've written, so we can try and apply them to what we're going to write. So we don't want to know this is the awesome book you've written. Please plug it, and plug it some more, like you've done on every other podcast, and everyone's heard you plug it, and plug it some more. So when I read the 5-minute author, I was really taken with the topics that we did cover in this podcast. So that's why I wanted you on, and that's why we interrogated you not so eloquently with, X's verbal diarrhea. That was lovely.
It's just writing's not easy, and as much as people try to pretend it isn't. It's hard work. It's hard work just to put your butt in the chair. And then once you're in the chair and you got your life settled and it's quiet so you can actually think and focus on that story, it's hard to actually get into that story sometimes, no matter how much excited you are about it or how much you love the character or the world. Sometimes it's just hard to do that. And there is no answer. There's no magic button when it comes to writing. The best advice I can give, and I like to give, is just to keep on writing. If you want to write a book, do what you got to do to get ready, but then just write it, poop it out, vomit it out, do whatever you got to do. And once it's out and you can see the story, you can analyze it, you can figure out what works and what doesn't, then you can go back and fix things and tweak things and do what you got to do. But otherwise, there's no easy answer. You just got to do it.
Yeah, and since we've not written much over 2016, we are definitely back into the getting your stuff sorted, your butt in the chair, and words spewed out onto the page. So it's been very helpful to be able to pick your brain. Scott, thank you for being on. Just quickly, where can people find you on the internet?
Now you can plug.
Now I can plug. My website is www. What?
You can breathe now. It's okay.
My website is www.scottking.info. You'll see lots of landscape photography and board game photography because I do photography on the side. If you want to find me on Twitter, I am at Scott King. And that's really it. Those are my two hotspots.
That's awesome. That's great. And you can find us if you're listening on audio. We actually have a website. We are on Publishing Without Supervision. We are PWSpodcast.com. That again is PWSpodcast.com. And we're also on Twitter and Facebook, so you can find us there. I am Erica Conroy, and as usual, this was my lovely Canadian hipster with bad bedhead co-host at Xavier Granville.
Hi.
So Xavier, what do we say to our listeners?
Au revoir, internets.
Good night.